wanted to bring today's episode to the podcast talking all about Ozempic and other similar drugs and when to use these, or if you should use these when you're on the fertility journey, preconception health, the pros, the cons. It's a huge buzz right now, obviously, with many people taking this and seeing good results. But we're going to be talking about, is this right for you when you are on the fertility journey? Let's go. Hey, Betty, excited to have you on the podcast.
I'm so excited to be here, Sarah.
Yeah, great to talk to you. Just share with our listeners here really how you came to do this work. You have a little journey yourself.
Yeah, I think, I have yet to meet somebody in the functional medicine world that doesn't have a story. Mm-hmm. So much like that, I do have a story. I actually was interested in health and nutrition and actually wanted to be a doctor, but I was a child of the 80s. So I might be older than a lot of your listeners. I got to school and I was like, man, I don't know if I want to do 12 years plus a residency. I mean, honestly, I wanted to get out. I wanted to be an adult. I was working full time and paying for school full time and going to school full time. So I went into a business degree and got out, but that was always kind of what I spent my free time doing. And I'd had digestive troubles, and they started sort of ramping up when I was in college, but it was one of those things like, oh, I ate pizza, I drank beer, you let it go. And then the episodes started getting worse. And I was diagnosed later on in life in my early 30s with colitis. And that diagnosis took a long time to get, because actually when I started actually having really bad symptoms that were frequent enough for me to really go, okay, this is bad, I started gaining weight, which can be a whole nother conversation because most of the time you lose weight. And I remember asking one of the gastroenterologists if I had that, and he laughed at me and he said, no way, because you'd be thin. And, and I was like, okay. So when I actually was diagnosed, the next question I thought was very logical was, could I change something I'm eating to change the trajectory of my autoimmune digestive disorder? And he was equally as obnoxious and said, it has nothing to do with what you eat. And I just couldn't accept that. And I couldn't accept the idea that the only choice I had were these biologic drugs that opened up the door for, all kinds of diseases. So I went back and started just taking classes. I was like, okay, I'm going to take some classes on nutrition, sort of deep dive in. And it was like all of a sudden I was home, and so I went back prerequisites, to get a master's and took, even some certifications to figure out the emotional side of it. And then, started my private practice. And then now I'm almost 55. So it's been a long trajectory. And the other thing that I was always curious about was, I felt like as women, and I'm sure men and women both listen to your podcast, but as women, the reproductive rights that we have to actually have the joy of carrying a child also leave us at a much more complex health problems. So the other side of it is I'm very, very interested and have spent, another master's and a Ph.D. trying to understand women's hormones and how they play a role in all of these conditions. And so, a lot of it is my own experience. And now, of course, being postmenopausal, I've been through the whole gamut of the experience of hormones.
Right. That's a whole other podcast episode, which is not really for this audience. But a lot of people feel they're slipping into early menopause. And where our whole thesis is it actually the adrenals, which impact the thyroid, and then your AMH and your FSH levels. And they're told that their periods, they have absent periods or regular periods. And, is it the stress of potential food sensitivities, gut infections, all the environmental toxins, all that piece that were, has that then impacted your cycle?
Oh, absolutely. After 20 years of owning my own clinic, we've had so many patients that were told, you're an ovarian failure. You're not going to get pregnant again. There's no chance, or even for the first time. And just lo and behold, you get the person well and they're pregnant on their own naturally, which I know, obviously that's what you do, because that's not even my clinic specialty, but we have lots and lots of success stories. And I know you do have fun.
Like amazing when you work on your health. And like you said, with the ulcerative colitis, then when they're saying that diet doesn't matter, when with an autoimmune disease, it's like foundational. And, we're just asking the wrong person. I was interviewing someone today about cancer, and someone asked the oncologist, does diet matter? Does it, with my breast cancer diagnosis? No, it doesn't matter. You just asked the wrong person, right? just crazy what's happening out there. That's why it's important to have a team with, functional medicine, functional nutrition approach. It's not about not having medication, but it's also about looking at your diet, your mindset, your stress, all of that piece is key.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. You can't ignore it.
Yeah. And so a hot topic today, Ozempic. We're going to be going into these different drugs that are on the market right now to really help with weight loss. And there's been a whole spring of Ozempic babies coming up because people are going on this to lose weight. And next thing you know, hey, you work on your health and you lose some weight, and then they're pregnant by surprise. Yeah. So what's your take on Ozempic babies? Anything you wanted to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, we've long known that I'm going to call it metabolic derangement. So when your metabolism which basically means how your body manages insulin and glucose, and the hormones that manage the movement of those things through your body and the utilization, when that is no longer working, you're either pre-diabetic or polycystic ovarian syndrome, insulin resistant, that often fertility pays a price for that. And so if somebody is on a medication that ultimately changes a bunch of those hormonal pathways, which I'm sure we'll get into, lo and behold, their fertility becomes better, but it's not because they were directly doing any fertility medications. And so what that really tells you is that fertility is a metabolic thing, not just a sex hormone thing.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. Looking at the underlying reason as to what's happening, and we get stuck on our diagnosis and don't look at the other biomarkers that are right in front of us. And doctors are saying, looking down your lab work and saying everything is normal, but it's not optimal, or, telling you your thyroid's fine when meanwhile it's, 3 and it should be under 2. And, you've got all these different symptoms. So, okay. So let's talk about Ozempic. And so it can go under different names. So these GLP-1 drugs. So the Trulicity, Mounjaro, Ozempic, Wegovy. Okay, what is it? What is it used for? And the craze right now with all these celebrities, right? That you see that they all of a sudden they seem to have come out of hiding, and I'm like, but then they have this very gaunt look, like this very not well, like almost like a body, like a head suspended on a body. It's just an interesting look. And then sometimes with all the plastic surgery they have too, there's a whole other thing. But what exactly are these drugs, and why do they?
Yeah.
Why? Yeah.
Okay, so we have two classes of drugs that fall into these categories. And so the first one is what we'll call is a GLP-1 medication, and that's going to be your Ozempic. Also, so Ozempic is the original name for the diabetes version. I always get these confused. I always forget, but the diabetes versions, and then it was also renamed as Wegovy at a higher dose for weight loss. It's also known by its generic name called semaglutide. And then there is GIP-1s or GIP drugs, and that's going to be Mounjaro, or also known as tirzepatide. And the important thing to know is these drugs were originally designed and created to help control type 2 diabetes, and Trulicity would fall into this category as well. And essentially they alter several actions of insulin and pancreatic function and things in the gut that for a diabetic can help lower blood sugar, can help cause improved insulin sensitivity. And ultimately they found, hey, check it out, there was some weight loss, right? Which is then, how they came about. But I think the more important thing is these are drugs that primarily work in the gut. And diabetes research and weight loss research has always pretty much centered on, diet, not so much diet and lifestyle, but drugs that would affect the function of the pancreas, like how your body's making insulin, which is the hormone that picks up blood sugar and takes it like a taxi cab to the cells to burn, or stores it as fat. Or they were designed to affect your sensitivity to insulin. And what it really does, this is the thing that really started fascinating me most about these drugs, is most of their actions are in the gut itself and in the act of digestion and how it interplays with your pancreas and insulin control. And so it was kind of by happenstance that they were found to be used for weight loss. But they've become very popular. It's probably the most popular drug out of compared to fen-phen, which was also a very popular drug that exploded onto the market in the early 90s and also killed a bunch of people and was one of the largest class action lawsuits in the world. Matter of fact, I wrote the foreword for the lawyer that defended those individuals in that class action lawsuit. His last book that he wrote about the entire experience, how the pharmaceutical companies sort of hid that from, from the world. They knew that there was risk with the drugs. So these drugs are very, very popular. And I would say that they have their place in medicine for sure, but they get overprescribed and they have side effects that can be quite negative, which we can talk about. And we can talk about the mechanisms, but they're similar but different.
It's interesting. I was talking to my chiropractor and she said her mom went into her to see her doctor and she said she didn't even need, her mom isn't even overweight. And the doctor said, hey, would you like some Ozempic? I'm like what? Just like doling it out like candy, and not even person wasn't even asking for it, but like, here you go. And I'm like, I don't know if they're still getting kickbacks for this stuff, but something seemed a little bit off with that. And then for Ozempic with the hormones and fertility. So let's kind of talk about that, because I guess it can take about 6 weeks for Ozempic or to be gone from the body. And so you want to make sure someone who's planning, if they're on it, then go off of it, because that could, not be good for preconception health. Obviously with these Ozempic babies, this is happening by surprise, but how is it impacting the hormones?
Yeah. So Ozempic, which is a GLP-1, it does a couple things. So so here's where it's weird. So it stimulates insulin secretion, right? So that means your insulin's going to go up. You're going to have blood sugar that's going to get lowered because of it. And it inhibits another hormone called glucagon that affects what the liver is up to, because the liver can produce glucose when you don't need it, right? Or not when you necessarily don't need it, but when your body is not using fat as fuel. So glucagon is the signal that tells the body, hey, make some more glucose, right? And those two work in opposition to each other. So if I take Ozempic, it's going to make insulin pop out more quickly and reduce the liver's ability to make glucose, which is very important because they do play a role in weight gain and like polycystic ovarian syndrome. Those two hormones do that. And then they also change like satiety, like are you hungry or not, or gastric emptying. And I'd say that's where a lot of our symptoms show up. So the challenge is yes, it's got a fairly long half-life when you inject it. So the injections are the ones that have shown the true efficacy. And so once you've got that in your system, it's going to influence those hormones, but it's also going to influence, preconception. And I would say, it's not ethical to test these things on somebody getting pregnant or somebody who is pregnant, because we don't know the impact of that long term. And so, yes, ideally you want to be off the medication so you're not having a baby that is actually receiving basically an injection of Ozempic through, hepatic circulation into the placenta.
Right. Yeah. Let's kind of go into some of the risks then. I just looking here. So Mounjaro versus Ozempic for weight loss. I guess studies have found that the use of GLP-1 agonists have direct correlation to weight loss, with the one study in the New England Journal of Medicine finding that adults lost an average of 15% of their body weight within 15 months time. Anything you wanted to say on, because what you were saying, they were different than the Mounjaro?
Yeah, they're slightly different. Yeah. So like I said, so Ozempic or semaglutide is that GLP-1. So it slows gastric. So the big take home is it slows gastric emptying. So your stomach slows and your digestion slows. And so you're not hungry. You feel overly full. It does have an effect on the brain. So it seems to promote satiety. So you're more satisfied by what you eat. And a lot of people say like that it helps a little bit with the food noise, like the food chatter about, cravings and things like that. And it seems to have a protective effect on the cells inside the pancreas that produce insulin, and it helps you produce more, and it shuts down the liver. So it's working there. Now, Mounjaro, which is somewhat similar, it also stimulates insulin secretion by stimulating another cell in the intestine called a K cell. So it helps enhance insulin secretion from the pancreas. But oddly enough, it promotes the storage of fat in adipose tissue, that particular hormone. But because Mounjaro has a GIP and a little bit of GLP-1, it's actually working on both sides. So we see weight loss. When we look at the studies between, let's say, we'll call it Ozempic and Mounjaro, just for ease of conversation, they both result in weight loss. Mounjaro slightly outperforms because it has slightly less symptoms, because the symptoms are high, depending on the research that you're looking at. Side effects are anywhere from 27 to 37 to 40% of the people taking the medications have significant symptoms of digestive concerns, right? High when you look at medications. Mounjaro is slightly better than that, from a particularly digestive symptom problems. So the most common symptoms people experience is nausea, feeling of kind of early fullness and not being able to eat a full meal, slow digestion. So it slows the entire motor of the digestive tract. So you're more likely to get constipation and or nausea or vomiting. And then, interestingly enough, there is a condition called gastroparesis, where think of the engine of the digestive system, the mechanics of it aren't working very well, and that is a pathological condition, where it doesn't work very well and you cannot digest very well. There are concerns about these drugs possibly triggering the onset of gastroparesis, and it seems that it's dose dependent. On very low doses, we don't see as much digestive stuff. But as you increase the dose and increase in efficacy from a weight loss standpoint, often the symptoms get worse. So Wegovy, the rebranding of Ozempic, is a higher dose for weight loss, but more side effects.
I know, and it seems, with the side effects, then are you using other drugs to then combat the side effects? Because sometimes you'll say, I don't know, I was just hearing something recently, someone was saying about, a drug is not going to get approved unless it has a bunch of side effects, because then we need other drugs to help the side effects. And therefore, that's what consumable things, that's what makes money.
It's an interesting way to look at it. But yeah, I mean, a lot of times people are dosing that and then they're giving like Phenergan or something else to offset the nausea that you get.
Yeah. And then, I guess, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead, please.
Yeah, just at the end, I saw the injection sites there saying reactions from headache and also inflammation of the nasal passages.
Interesting. I have not read that one. Yeah, I've not read that one. So the interesting thing I would say about all of these is so if you look at the numbers, right? So the people experienced around 15% loss of weight loss, right? Anywhere from 15% over 15 months. So what would that equate to? Because a lot of times they throw that number out as a percentage. And I'll tell you, I'm the first one that hates math, right? I do statistical analysis as a PhD, but I don't really love math. So 15% isn't really meaningful for me. But if I'm a 150-pound person, 10% is 15 pounds, right? Mm-hmm. So you can look at that and go, okay, so what is that? 17 and a half pounds or whatever. I'm 21 pounds. So over 15 months, you lose 21 pounds. On average, that's what the research showed. What was more important to me was it was the muscle mass that was lost. Yeah. It was extraordinary muscle loss. And the reality is it's not easy, particularly for women, but anybody to put on muscle. And so if I'm losing 3/4 or more of that fat loss, and it's truly muscle. So if I lose, let's say 25 pounds and 22 of it is muscle, I am more metabolically damaged when I'm done than when I started, because every extra pound of muscle you have on average for a female can burn up to 150 more calories, right? That's also your energy producer. That's the place where your body disposes of blood sugar. So if you lose 20 pounds of muscle, you may very well, unless you really work at it, never get it back on.
Be a very sick, thin person.
Right. And that's why you see the muscle wasting. Like you see, they're starting to talk about the gaunt faces where it's very drawn, so all of a sudden you lose that natural sort of, cheeks and natural muscle and padding that you have. So you look more gaunt, more frail.
Yeah, like a hollow look in the eyes too, just like sunken in. I'm like, that's interesting. Okay, yeah, and also I guess there's also a risk of pancreatitis I'm seeing here. And then they also said some suicidal ideation as a side effect.
Yeah, that's been pretty new. So again, we thought these drugs were mostly acting in the gut because they act on receptors inside your intestines, your small intestines, right? And so everything was thought to be, it's in the gut and it's affecting, the pancreas and insulin and a little bit of what liver function is. But we have those same receptors in the brain and they affect hypothalamic control. And so, there is some reporting of suicidal ideations and depression. But, even on, and I like to be honest about it, even on the other side, they're also starting to see that some people that may have alcohol use disorder and other, binge eating and things like that, there seems to be some positive effect of that as well, because it's probably turning off some of that food noise or the
Yeah,
addiction.
that's what I've seen just with some conversations there with people that have taken it, that they were just had not an alcoholic, but a lifelong, like, I would like to have a drink kind of thing, and then going on it, and now just not really having the urge, which then, because when they were drinking, then you lose your inhibitions, and next thing you know, you're having a big bag of chips. And so with that, they've lost a lot of weight over in very like small increments. So it's been helpful for some people, I guess, doing it in small, and then still working out and exercising. So I guess let's go into so those are all the bad stuff with it. And I wonder if it's because we were talking about this before, like the dosage, because sometimes they're giving like quite high dosages and then injecting it, and there's other ways to look at this. But what are some potential pros for this?
Yeah. So, I think there's several things. So I think the first thing that people, if they're listening to this and they're considering these medications, I think there's a time and place for all of these. And these medications in the studies showed to be especially more effective in people who had a lot of weight to lose. So right now, to qualify for Ozempic, you've got to have a BMI over 29. Right. So you have to be in that obese category. So if you've got 15, 20 pounds to lose, this isn't the drug for you. Right. Because actually, when you look at the studies, the people that had considerably more weight to lose took longer to lose it. Yes, because they had more weight to lose, but they had the rebound weight gain was slower than the person that took it who had 20 pounds, who discontinued it. They actually gained more weight back at a faster rate. Because these drugs are lifestyle drugs. Right. So the reality is the effect of these drugs and how they're working, at least to how we understand it today, is as soon as you withdraw the drugs, they no longer work anymore. So the food noise comes back. The function of the pancreatic function and the liver function that impairs metabolism may very well come back. Right. Especially if you haven't corrected for the diet and lifestyle and really changed that beingness every day of what you're doing. Right. So I think if somebody was in the situation where they're like, you know what, my doctor 2 years ago was talking to me about gastric sleeve, or I've been struggling, for a long time and I can't get the weight off. These drugs may very well be a good choice, but I think we have to get our head wrapped around. And we have people in our clinic. We aren't out there doing the land grab of, everybody want Ozempic because it's a great way to bring in patients. We don't do that, but we do have some people that this is the choice that they're on. They just know that it may be something that they might be doing long term, or at least a lot longer term than what they expect, right? Because it's not something that you take to get down into your fighting weight so you can go to the high school reunion to just go off of it the following day, because the end result is you will probably gain the weight back plus some. Right?
Yeah, like you said, if there's a BMI of 29, if they're in that obese category and they've been struggling for a while, or maybe they, like in this case, they might be said, hey, we won't do IVF with you unless you lose the weight. And obviously people that are trying to lose weight, it's easier said than done.
Right, which is where it kind of plays into that. Yes.
Yeah. So I've just anecdotally, I don't know, like I've seen people that are taking Mounjaro and then, I lost my period. Oh, I lost a lot of weight, but then, hey, my period's gone away. I'm like, well, when did you start taking that? And they sort of coincided along the same time they started taking the drug. Now, I don't know if there's anything that you're seeing or what the literature or anything would say about cycles and these drugs.
Yeah, so there's a lot of side effects beyond the digestive one. Hair loss is a huge one too. Very, very, very common. And so the loss of the period is probably coming from the amount of weight lost and the speed of weight loss. The reality is all of these hormones, the fertility hormones like your estrogen and progesterone and even testosterone, are intimately tied to the metabolic hormones like insulin and glucagon, and they're tied to your thyroid. So dramatic weight loss is seen by the body as a stress response. Because again, for millions of years, famine was our possible reality, way more than where, we have just excess today. And so the body looks at weight loss that's rapid, particularly loss of muscle mass, and says, oh, it's not safe on the Serengeti. I do not need to reproduce. I'm like, so I'm just going to stop the period, because the stopping of the period is a sign that there's something metabolically wrong. And, and there are people that have abnormal periods and things like that on a continuum. But if you had a regular period and all of a sudden it stopped, there's a reason. And it's just like the female athlete, right? I have a lot of female athletes that I've seen over my lifetime. Like when they're off season, their period would come back. And then, cross country would start up and the period would go away. I'm like, okay, that's because you're overtraining, right? You're overtraining, you're losing weight, your body is not perceiving your world as safe. The other thing is extreme dieting, where you're not getting your essential nutrients, particularly protein and fat, right? We can survive truly without carbs, but we need proteins and fat. And we actually, I would say, need all of those. But if you are under eating, which is what often happens on these meds, your body's going to go into a starvation response. And then the end result is it could slow down or even stop your periods because of that.
And I guess the long-term side effects, like so I was hearing someone talk about the fact that some of these drugs, I'm not sure which one of them, but had been around for 20 years and now they've just kind of rebranded. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. And then, so they're saying there is 20 years of data on some of these drugs, but do we fully have an understanding of the long-term side effects, as everybody is in an Ozempic craze? And if you Google it, you're going to go down a complete rabbit hole. But yeah, what are you seeing?
Yeah, there is a older version of this, these drugs that has been around for quite a while. And that's, if you see the argument that there's an increased risk of thyroid cancer, that was that drug that they were looking at. There was a couple studies that showed a slight increased risk. Again, very slight and very minimal. But, it's just like, so chemistry is an exact science, right? So think of it as a key. If I have a key, and let's say it's the GLP-1, right? It's a GLP-1, and it's going to click into your intestinal wall, into what they call the L cell. That key only fits perfectly, one key. I might have a key that's kind of like it, and it's kind of like, let's say you had a key and you sort of bent it, and it doesn't really work very well, so you jiggle it and jiggle it and jiggle it and jiggle it, and then it finally opens. When you make medications, they're never exactly the same, right? So we have GLP, the key that our body makes, right? Or actually our microbiome makes. Let me go ahead and rephrase that. We make it, but also our microbes make it. Then if I have the first version of that, it's a slightly bent key. Ozempic is another slightly bent key. Tirzepatide is that key plus another key. They're never 100% the same. And you can also never assume that if one was safe, the other one is safe, right? And vice versa. There's variation. So yes, we've had versions of these medications around for a long time, but we don't have large population data at the level of people taking this medication to show it's safe in the long term, right?
Yeah, because when did it come? So when did it become? Was it a couple of years ago, this whole thing, or when was it that it was all of a sudden approved for more than diabetes? If you know,
it's only been in the last few years that it was approved. More so than for diabetes. And the other thing too is somebody that I have a clinic that does a lot of compounded medications. The majority of people who are on these medications, especially outside of the, diabetes realm or the high BMI over 29, that are getting semaglutide, right? Buyer beware. I love compounding pharmacies, but it is all about the quality of the compounder, because compounding pharmacies are mixing it for you. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it has a perfect level every single time. And I would say the just explosion of people offering it always makes me a little nervous about, what's the quality of the peptide that they're getting? Are they going through, because they've just ramped up production 1,000 times more than what they did 2 years ago? Are they controlling for possible quality control issues too? Because the compounded one, they've added something else to it, like B12, so they're not in violation of the patent, right?
Okay,
so
gotcha.
They also are introducing something to it that wasn't there. Probably no big deal, but again, you can't say it's an apples to apples comparison.
Yeah, and I guess that's why the compounding things have come along, where because they're trying to say that some of those higher dosages are causing all these different side effects, and if you do a little lower dose, use a compounding pharmacy, there could be some more efficacy for that. And yeah, anything you want to sort of say about kind of if you do go lower and if you find the right compounding pharmacy?
So the big thing is Ozempic's really expensive. Ozempic and Wegovy are Yeah, I've heard anywhere from, $800 to $1,500 a month.
Yeah.
The compounding pharmacies are much, much cheaper. And you're right. Where you see the symptoms and the side effects increase is as you increase the dose, and usually it starts at 0.25 milligrams and can go up to 0.5 or up to 1 milligram. But when you start climbing that, 0.25 and up, that's where you really start to see the symptoms. So there is some thought process to possibly going slightly lower. Then the question really becomes is, do you see the results you expect? What I know is I've heard from a lot of potential clients and clients that, were either on it or working to get off of it, is they were pressuring to go up in dose because they wanted to see the number change more quickly. Right. So it's kind of buyer beware. The higher that dose goes, the more likely you are to have side effects, and so the lower doses tend to be less side effect driven.
Yeah, it's just a nuanced conversation, right? Especially with someone trying to have their baby and then like risking your health on this piece. But if you've been struggling for years and you've, with weight, and then instead of doing gastric bypass and those kind of other surgeries, this seems like a better option. But then what if it puts your stomach into knots or like peristalsis there? Like that's some serious stuff, right? If you're dealing with nausea and vomiting, like those kind of things, those side effects are not just like, wow, great. And if it's just too hard and you lose your cycle, which then that makes the whole thing trying to have your baby a little bit more difficult, obviously. So what about like metabolic health? What can we do from a functional nutrition medicine side of things to work on that? And I guess do we do this for a short period of time and then with the goal to get off it quickly, but then people become addicted to it? I don't know. What's your take on?
Yeah, I don't, so this is my professional opinion, my clinical opinion. I think if somebody's planning on using it, you should look at it as something you're going to be on for a long time. Like I said, it's not something you do for a couple months and sort of knock it out because number one, the weight doesn't come off that fast. Right. You see people in Hollywood because you haven't seen them in 6 months and all of a sudden, but it's been 6 months. Right. Because it's not this dramatic, massive weight loss. But I think there's some success that can be had, whether somebody's doing GLP-1s or GIPs, Ozempic, Wegovy, tirzepatide. There are some things that in order to make that work, or even if you're like, you know what, I don't want to do that, I'm really going to double down and try and improve my metabolic health, is you have to change the lifestyle, right? We have to deal with the metabolic cards I've been dealt, right? Not all of us have rip-roaring metabolisms, right? Some of us may be challenged. Once I hit puberty, I've never been a naturally thin person. I have to work at it, right? I had a friend that could eat cheeseburger and fries. Nothing ever happened. She was a stick. And I was like, I'm eating a salad and a cold chicken breast, and somehow or another, my butt got fatter, right? So I understand what drives that. So if you're on those medications or you're trying to make the change, you have to start looking at it and going, okay, I'm going to learn new habits. I'm going to go, okay, I'm going to remove processed foods out of my diet. I'm going to take out added sugars, particularly in the form of drinks, right? Don't drink juice. Don't drink sodas ever. You might as well mainline sugar or snort it like you're doing cocaine, because it is just straight sugar and your body doesn't know how to handle it in that way. I'm going to make sure that I get protein at every meal because protein is what I make things out of in my body. I'm going to make sure that I get healthy fats, your olive oil, your avocado oil, nuts and seeds, healthy animal fats, ideally from organically found meats. I'm going to eat food in its natural form. I don't see toast growing on the side of the road. That's not a whole grain, right? It's not. It's a whole grain that was broken down and then powderized and then made into some kind of form. So the more I eat food in the way the planet had it, I'm going to have a healthier body, even if my body is a little metabolically off, right? And I think if you're on these medications or considering them, if you can get that part sort of dialed in and going, okay, I'm going to start doing, if I'm not doing those things, I'm going to start doing those things, because the adoption of those dietary habits are going to make coming off the medication better. The other thing is I look at this as a researcher and somebody that spent way too much time also in the microbiome. I believe, because if you look, my dad was overweight, but he was unique in the 80s, right? In the early 80s, we didn't have the weight issues we see today. So what changed? I'm sorry, I ate mac and cheese. It was a different mac and cheese that had a lot less chemicals in it. We had Hamburger Helper. My parents did not do any wicked, like whole food kind of based diet. And my dad was overweight because he was just a dessert king. Like he just flat out overate, right? But no, there was very few people that were significantly overweight back then. So you got to look at it and go, what happened? We have chemicals in our foods, right? We have chemicals everywhere, but our foods are full of chemicals. And we have a microbiome that has probably radically changed. The problem is we didn't have the capacity to look at it then. We have gut bugs that produce GLP-1. Akkermansia does, right? We've got lots of changes that have happened in the gut because these drugs work in the gut predominantly. So the other thing to know is that if I eat foods like fermented foods and I do things that encourage a high quality microbiome, a good garden, fiber in my diet, 35 grams or more, those things are going to help those microbes grow and may very well produce my own natural GLP-1.
Yeah,
right?
that GLP-1 deficiency, but like fatty liver and obesity, diabetes, all that piece. And then, yeah.
Yeah. And it's a multifaceted approach. And that's what we help people do. We're like, okay, if you're on these meds or considering these meds, cool. Like we're here. Yeah. Let's make sure that you become the healthiest you can be. We don't lose muscle mass. And then if you're working to get off of them, we help support the function of the body underneath, because at the end of the day, we have to become a healthier version of ourselves and keep it, right? That's the ultimate goal, because we want a long health span. And especially if you want to become a mom or a dad, you got, as somebody who's 55, I'm going to go ahead and get old for a moment. You need to have the energy for that.
Right. That's right.
It's a long haul. You want to feel good for it.
Yeah. And it's like, sometimes people are like, what's the pill? What's the magic pill? And this seems like, the magic pill, but without doing the foundational pieces along with it, if you do decide to go that route. And no, I think it's informed consent too, right? Because a lot of stuff, sometimes we just don't really know. And they're like, here you go. This seems great. And then if you go deeper, oh my goodness, stroke, death, whatever it is in there. And we don't really know. Same with birth control. Here you go. You have irregular periods. Go on that for 30 years and wonder why you've got all these health issues. People that come off of it, obviously, they may have had fertility issues with their period, or they had, acne or something was going on beforehand. That's why they were recommended the pill. And then they come off, and lo and behold, we're dealing with issues here. And it, like you're talking about, impacts the microbiome. So doing all that foundational work, like balancing the blood sugar too, like considering a CGM. Anything you want to say about that?
Oh, I love CGMs. I think now, does somebody need, I've worn one off and on for like 3.5 years, just kind of as a touch base.
Yeah.
Even if somebody did one for a month, it is so enlightening to understand how you may be different than somebody else, right? To understand the impact of certain foods. Like I because I'm the queen of, I'll use myself as a guinea pig. I did an Instagram one time with my CGM on, and I went and got ice cream. I was like, I'm going to show you on an empty stomach what happens with ice cream. Like, no joke, within like 45 minutes, my blood sugar was 300. It's skyrocketed. And I was like, all right, so if you're doing that at 10:30 at night, what do you think is happening? Right. So it's like, if you even look at it as kind of a game, like some people get freaked out by having them. I'm like, look at it as first informative and then a game, because there is variability on your microbiome can vary it quite a bit. But then you start to understand how your body metabolizes food. We have a general understanding how people do, but everybody's slightly nuanced in how their body handles things.
Yeah. Personalized approaches over all this generalized stuff, just like waste time. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So you have got an opt-in here, or a special guide here for the listeners, and they can find it. I'll have it in the show notes, but it's sleep.hormoneshelp.com. What can they expect there?
Yeah, so this is a guide on how to get better quality sleep, particularly as a woman, right? A hormonal woman. So even if you're in fertility and you're not on the land, you're in a hormonal state in most cases, and it really helps you understand how to dial that process in and get quality sleep from now until much later.
Yeah, because sleep is the cornerstone of optimal health and optimal fertility. And I see, probably similar to you see in the clinic, so many people with disordered sleep from, they have a hard time falling asleep. They maybe have sleep apnea. They're snoring. They're they're waking up exhausted. They're just dragging themselves through the day. And it's not about having more, benzos and taking, tons of melatonin. There's things to do that can, to optimize your sleep, because that's a huge, red flag if that's off.
Apnea shortens your life more than smoking statistically, right? And it's an independent risk factor for diabetes and obesity. So it's to me very much a cornerstone, and we can't ignore it.
Absolutely. Okay. And so any final thoughts on our topic today here, Betty?
Yeah, I would say, the interesting thing about these drugs is there's a ton that are in the pipeline, right? So there's oral versions of this. The previous oral versions do not have really good efficacy research, but there is a ton of money being dumped into this arena. So I think we're going to probably see a lot more of these kind of drugs coming out. And again, I always kind of look at it and go, okay, buyer beware. We don't have long-term human studies to show what's it going to do in 20, 30 years. And I think it's a really important conversation to have with a practitioner that's not just, like you said, hey, you want some Ozempic today? Like this isn't a medication that you do that with. This is not a breath mint. And I think you want to have a really intense conversation about what your goals are, what your needs are, what your body's like, what your health state is right now, and whether this really is the right medication if you're considering it, because informed consent is really important. And about 95% of the time, no one ever gets it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Understand what it is you're getting into, because it could be a long-term thing you're doing, and you want to understand what it exactly is you're doing. I love it. Awesome.
Yeah, because informed consent is not only what does it do, what does it potentially have as a side effect, and what are the options outside of that you could do instead.
Yeah.
That's what informed consent is.
Yeah. And then asking the right person about informed consent, because if you just go and ask maybe your general practitioner, are they going to actually tell you some of the other things? So digging in and doing some research, but before you jump to say this is the the cure all, because all the celebrities are doing it.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you.